It all started with a lake, a dream, and a man named Glenn. Glenn wasn't the kind of guy who bothered anyone. He was a retired aerospace engineer who spent most of his days working on custom furniture projects and the occasional motorbike rebuild. After 40 years of corporate chaos, he'd earned his peace and moved out to the edge of a lake near a quiet, upscale suburban community called Ridgeway Pines. His slice of heaven? A modest, A-frame lake cabin with a detached steel workshop he built himself. The place sat at the edge of the HOA boundary line, a technicality that would come to define every moment of the story. At first, life was perfect. Blue herons flew low over the water. Mornings began with the hiss of fresh coffee and the sound of distant boat motors. And his neighbors? Friendly enough. They waved. They smiled. They stayed out of each other's business. Except one. Her name was Linda Forsyth, HOA president, self-declared community coordinator, real estate agent, Pilates instructor. You name it, Linda made her job. She drove a gleaming silver SUV that always looked freshly waxed and never had so much as a leaf stuck in the grill. Her wardrobe rotated between pastel blazers and mirrored sunglasses. Her resting expression was somewhere between judgment and forced cheerfulness. And she had a habit of parking where she didn't belong. See, Glenn's workshop sat just past the HOA boundary, technically his private property, separate from the association. It was built on the flattened edge of a slope, with a paved concrete apron that could fit 2 cars comfortably. The workshop itself had large, industrial roll-up doors, air ventilation, power tools, and every kind of saw a retired engineer could want. It was Glenn's sanctuary. But for Linda, it was convenient. It started subtly. First time, she parked in front of his workshop for just a minute while delivering open house signs. She waved, smiled, just grabbing something for a listing nearby, she chirped. Glenn didn't think twice. He waved back. Second time, she lingered for 20 minutes, chatting on the phone in her SUV, blocking his access to the garage. Glenn had to go around and park his truck on the grass. Third time, she had the audacity to leave a sticky note on his door. Hope you don't mind. This was the only open space during the HOA meeting. You're technically not HOA, right? Winking face, Linda. The winky face was too much. That was when Glenn started tracking it. By the end of the month, she'd parked there 9 times. Sometimes for 5 minutes, other times for an hour. No apology. No heads up, just a luxury SUV planted like it owned the place. He approached her once, politely. "Hey, Linda," he said one afternoon as she was climbing out of her vehicle, heels clicking on his concrete. "Would appreciate it if you didn't block my workshop. I've got a lot of gear in there, and I usually back my truck up to the door." "Oh, I know," she said, as if she were telling him something about his own property. "But you got so much space back here, Glenn. It's just a quick drop-off. Besides," she paused, glancing around theatrically, "there aren't a lot of rules for non-HOA land, right?" He clenched his jaw. She was right. Technically, he was just far enough out that the HOA couldn't find him. But that also meant she couldn't legally use his space either. She was towing a line, and she knew it. Then it got worse. One Saturday, Glenn had a delivery scheduled, a heavy order of reclaimed lumber for a new project. The driver was running late, and Glenn was pacing, waiting outside. When the flatbed finally arrived, Glenn's stomach sank. Linda's SUV was parked again, squarely in front of the workshop doors. He knocked on her door. No answer. He texted her, no reply. He called her, voicemail. The delivery truck couldn't wait, so Glenn had to ask the driver to dump the wood on the gravel road beside his cabin. He'd now have to wheelbarrow every piece, one at a time, back to the shop. By the end of the day, he was covered in sweat and mosquito bites. His back ached. And Linda? She returned at 5:45 p.m., breezing down the hill like she was just popping in from yoga class. "Oh no, did I block something?" she said in that patronizing tone. "You blocked everything," Glenn said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I had a delivery scheduled. You cost me 5 hours." She blinked. "Well, maybe you should have texted." He stared at her in disbelief. "I did." She gave a tight-lipped smile. Well, next time, just put a cone out or something, okay? That was the moment. The switch flipped. Glenn wasn't an angry man. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't seek revenge. But he did design landing gear for the Navy for 30 years. He believed in systems. And this system was broken. That night, he sat on his porch with a cold beer, watching the lake reflect the amber dusk. He pulled out a notepad and began to sketch. A plan. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be illegal, but it would be undeniable. Linda wanted to park in front of the shop, then she was going to stay there. Glenn spent the next few days watching. Not stalking, not obsessing, just observing. He kept a journal. A small spiral notepad sat on his workshop bench, labeled Linda Times. Monday, 8:12 a.m., park for 46 minutes. Wednesday, 3:42 p.m., 23 minutes. Friday, 9:05 a.m., an entire hour. She was using his space like it was her personal overflow lot. Meanwhile, his schedule revolved around avoiding her car. He couldn't get deliveries lined up. He couldn't maneuver his truck into the workshop. He even started waking up earlier just to finish cutting wood before her SUV showed up. It wasn't just inconvenient. It was disrespectful. The final straw came on a humid Thursday morning. Glenn had finally arranged for a friend to help him install a custom steel table, a monster of a project that required lifting straps, both roll-up doors wide open, and precise backing in of a rented trailer. They were halfway through positioning the slab when Glenn's friend froze mid-step. "Dude," he said, pointing over Glenn's shoulder. Glenn turned just in time to see the silver SUV, that familiar gleaming tank, pulling up and swinging casually into its now usual spot in front of the workshop. Linda stepped out, phone in hand, wearing oversized sunglasses and a pastel pink blouse. She didn't even acknowledge them, just clicked her key fob and walked toward the HOA office up the hill. His friend raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" Glenn said nothing, but his jaw set like a vice. That night, the plan became reality. He drove out to a local welding supply shop, picked up some fresh rods, refilled his acetylene tank, bought a thick steel pipe 2 feet long, 4 inches wide, and when he got home, he took precise measurements of the steel brackets around his workshop doors. He wasn't going to vandalize her vehicle. He wasn't going to damage anything. He was going to inconvenience her the same way she'd inconvenience him, only with the surgical precision of a man who once designed hydraulic safety locks for fighter jets. Friday morning arrived, and right on cue, the silver SUV rolled into view. Linda parked with confidence, sipping from her reusable tumbler like she was in a coffee commercial. Glenn, sitting on his porch, gave her a polite nod. She nodded back, completely unaware. As soon as she disappeared into the HOA building again, Glenn got to work. Step 1. He wheeled over 2 custom-cut steel beams he prepared in advance. Each one had been drilled and fitted with sliding clamps. Step 2. He closed both of his roll-up workshop doors and secured them. Step 3. He slid the steel beams across the seams, one at the top, one at the bottom, then welded them into place. Not just a little tack weld, a full bead, the kind of seam that turns red hot and sinks deep into the metal beneath. Permanent, smooth, and unbreakable without serious equipment. The workshop, now completely inaccessible. Then came the final detail. He walked over to Linda's SUV, leaned close, and placed a single yellow sticky note on the driver's side window. "Enjoy your stay. I'm off for a 10-day fishing trip. Don't worry, I locked up." And with that, he locked his cabin, packed his truck, hitched up his boat, and drove off into the horizon. He didn't turn around once. 10 days later, Glenn returned. The lake had been good to him. He'd caught trout, recharged his batteries, and forgotten what HOA even stood for. But the moment his truck turned back into the Ridgeway Pines cul-de-sac, he was greeted by the familiar scent of suburban panic. Linda's SUV was still there, but now it was the centerpiece of the neighborhood. 3 other HOA board members were pacing nearby, talking into their phones. Someone had set up an orange traffic cone near the bumper. A hand-scrawled sign taped to the windshield read, "Do not tow. Property dispute in progress." Glenn slowed to a crawl. One of the neighbors, Mark, a retired dentist, walked up with a big grin. Glenn, hey, buddy, nice to see you. There's been a situation. Glenn stepped out of his truck and played dumb. Situation? Mark chuckled awkwardly. Yeah, so apparently Linda parked here again, and when she tried to leave that afternoon, your workshop doors were welded shut. She couldn't get out. Oh, really? Glenn said, squinting at the doors. Huh. Must have been a safety upgrade. You know, some guys were breaking into lakefront cabins recently. Mark nodded. Well, she couldn't open the doors, and she said she didn't want to reverse out because she was blocked in. Glenn looked around. There was nothing behind her vehicle. Just open air. He frowned. Weird. Looked fine to me. Mark lowered his voice. She called the sheriff. Then code enforcement. Then a lawyer. She's been trying to get the HOA to issue you a citation, but you're technically not even on HOA land. Glenn nodded slowly. Sounds frustrating. By the time Linda came storming out of the HOA office, red-faced and fuming, the entire neighborhood was watching. She pointed at him from across the street. You think this is funny? You think this is cute? I've missed 3 showings, Glenn. 3. Glenn tilted his head. Well, if you'd let me know you were using the space long-term, I might have given you a key. You welded the doors, she screamed. I've been trapped here for 10 days. You weren't trapped, he said. You were parked on private property. She shook her head, practically vibrating. You are so getting sued. He smiled. Go ahead. Just make sure you file it with someone outside the HOA. The neighbors laughed. Mark actually clapped. Linda stormed off. Her SUV, freshly ticketed by the county for improper parking, sat in embarrassed silence behind her. And Glenn? He went into his cabin, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and sat on his porch in peace. For the first time in weeks, nobody parked in front of his workshop. The day after Glenn returned from his fishing trip, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. It was a kind of gathering usually reserved for storm damage or community elections, but this one had a far juicier agenda. Disciplinary action against Lot 37 Glen. Linda, seated at the head of the conference table, looked like a prosecutor ready to deliver her closing argument. She had a manila folder full of printed photos, a flash drive, and what appeared to be a formal complaint she drafted herself. Let's be very clear, she announced to the room. What Glenn did was not just petty, it was dangerous. Welding steel doors shut while someone is parked nearby is an extreme safety hazard. He could have set the car on fire. He could have. Linda, interrupted Marcia, one of the other board members. Wasn't your car parked on his private property? Linda blinked. Excuse me? His cabin workshop isn't HOA-controlled land. You said yourself he isn't part of our covenant, Marcia continued. You parked there without permission. For weeks. Linda turned red. That's irrelevant. It's not, actually, chimed in Roger, the board treasurer. We looked into the maps. Lot 37 opted out of the HOA in 2004 when the bylaws changed. He's been paying for his own trash pickup and road maintenance ever since. He owes the HOA nothing. Linda's folder trembled in her hand. He can't just do that. He can't take justice into his own hands. Roger smirked. Like when you parked in front of his roll-up shop doors. So often he had to weld them shut just to go fishing in peace? The room chuckled. Even Susan, the newest board member, bit her lip trying not to laugh. Linda slammed the folder shut. So that's it? You're all okay with this? Marcia leaned back in her chair. Honestly? Yeah, you've been overstepping for months. Not just with Glenn. You called code enforcement on someone's lawn height. You threatened a neighbor's teenager for selling lemonade on the sidewalk. You even tried to fine the Hendersons for painting their mailbox. I was protecting community standards, Linda said, nearly shouting. Marcia replied evenly. No, Linda, you were protecting your own power. The board voted, not just to dismiss Linda's complaint, but to remove her from the presidency altogether. The motion passed 4-1. She stormed out without another word. Word spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, the entire neighborhood knew what Glenn had done. People whispered about it at mailboxes, shared photos of the welded doors in private Facebook groups. A meme even circulated with Glenn's face photoshopped onto Clint Eastwood's body, holding a welding torch like a shotgun. Caption, "Go ahead, park there again." Teenagers in the neighborhood started calling the front of Glenn's cabin the no-park zone. Even Amazon delivery drivers learned to steer clear. For Glenn, it was sweet, slow-moving justice. He didn't gloat. He didn't rub it in. He just resumed his quiet life, chopping firewood, fixing up boats, feeding the ducks that waddled up to his porch. But the impact rippled far beyond his cabin. Linda's reputation crumbled. Several neighbors who had previously felt intimidated by her newfound title and clipboard-wielding righteousness finally spoke up. One elderly couple revealed she had fined them $50 for having a non-compliant garden gnome. A single mother came forward about a warning letter she got for excessive wind chimes. Suddenly, people began digging into the HOA's finances. Glenn, of course, watched from the sidelines. But in early fall, Roger stopped by his workshop. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing Glenn a thick envelope. It was a class action petition. 27 homeowners were collectively suing the HOA for abuse of authority, misappropriation of funds, and harassment, largely stemming from policies Linda had pushed through during her time as president. Roger smiled. Turns out welding some doors shut caused more good than harm. Glenn just nodded and went back to sanding the hull of an old canoe. A month later, Linda moved out. Her for sale sign stayed up for 6 weeks longer than expected. Rumor had it no one wanted to deal with the bad karma of buying the house of the woman who once tried to find someone for hanging a flag too early before Memorial Day. When a buyer finally came along, it was under market price. They repainted the door the same week. And Linda? She disappeared to a condo in a different development across town, one without an HOA. She would never again wield power over sidewalk cracks and mailbox placement. Back in Ridgeway Pines, Glenn's life returned to something even better than normal. Neighbors who had once ignored him now waved warmly when they drove by. Kids on bikes stopped to ask about his old tools. One local dad offered to help rebuild the front steps of his cabin in thanks for what he did for the community. And Glenn? He never welded the doors shut again, because he didn't need to. A small wooden sign now hung just outside the driveway. Private property. No parking. I really mean it. And beneath it, carved in steel and bolted into gravel, stood a custom-built deterrent, a 4-foot sculpture shaped like a welding torch, the tip glowing orange with LED lights. Just a reminder, because sometimes poetic justice comes not from yelling or threats or lawsuits, but from knowing exactly where to weld the line.